Yeah, Foxbat, the part where he says, all my friends and family turned on me is heart-wrenching because you absolutely know that that was him falling down an utterly insane rabbit hole of conspiracy and having a mental breakdown and probably not being able to stop talking to them about it. Yeah, so the thing about this that I immediately recognized is that Max Azzarello, despite the fact that both he and Aaron Bushnell self-immolated, that's really where the similarities of their political action end. And in fact, he is a lot closer to Justin Moon, who we covered several months ago, and you may remember was a conspiracy theorist who killed his own dad for believing that his dad was in league with Biden and the deep state. Not only did he light himself on fire, he spread pamphlets right before. The man who doused himself with accelerant and set himself ablaze outside Donald Trump's Manhattan trial on Friday published an online manifesto declaring that he self-immolated to warn the world about a, quote, apocalyptic fascist world coup. The self-immolating conspiracy theorist was identified by cops as Max Azzarello, a 37-year-old from St. Augustine, Florida, who was in critical condition on Friday afternoon. He declared online that his act was a, quote, extreme act of protest to draw attention to an urgent and important discovery. His Substack manifesto is a dizzying document that rails against cryptocurrency, New York University, the Clintons, and the world governments, warning readers that they are, quote, victims of a totalitarian con akin to a massive Ponzi scheme. During a Friday afternoon press conference, the NYPD said that around 1:35, Azzarello removed multiple pamphlets and an alcohol-based accelerant from his book bag. He then doused himself in the accelerant and set himself ablaze, falling onto a police barrier and collapsing to the ground engulfed in flames. Quote, the true history of the world, Haunted Carnival Edition, one of the pamphlets he possessed read, quote, our only goal is to replace our criminal government and replace it with one that serves all. NYU is a mob front, another pamphlet claimed. So when I talk about the similarities between him and Justin Moon, the thing that I see most in common is weird personal fixations that come out in their conspiracies, which you saw a lot with Justin. He had a lot of things that had either obviously happened to him or he perceived as happening to him that manifested themselves in his writings, in his stories, that became themes. And I think NYU is one of those for Max. He's been unwell, said one family friend, who asked not to be named because of the sensitivity of the situation. They said Azzarello, who is living in St. Augustine and working as a consultant, but previously lived in New York, where NYU is, he was very intelligent and a strong-willed person who was extremely kind. He was a kind guy. He had a big heart. He just battled with some mental illness. And this is the other correlation I find, because again, so many people, because they're two cases of politically motivated self-immolation, they're obviously going to draw parallels between this one and Aaron Bushnell. The other big problem with that is that Aaron Bushnell, again, appeared to be of sound mind. And everything I've seen that has come out about him since only continues to really verify that for me personally. But both Justin Moon and Azzarello, not only did they fall down these conspiracy rabbit holes, which we have talked about so much on here, which have just proliferated and continue to fester on the internet, but they dealt with previous mental illness beforehand. Mental illnesses that either went untreated, undiagnosed, and because of that, only continued to fester and proliferate in these conspiracy theories. Terranova on Twitch saying, some of the stuff in this guy's pamphlets and manifestos are definitely unhinged. I just wish he got the help he needed. My heart breaks for this guy. And so one of the big problems with his manifesto is that he actually brings up a lot of good points, which is what a conspiracy theory hinges on. It hinges on, and it doesn't matter if it's anti-Semitism, it doesn't matter if it's, Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing, it doesn't matter any of that. There always needs to be something that you point out to somebody and it gets them thinking to go, oh yeah, that does make sense. And of course, like with any other conspiracy theory, you scratch it and it's either based somewhat in fact, or it's a cover for something else entirely, like anti-Semitism. The thing that he gets at, and he's big on talking about tech oligarchs, and we'll talk about all this in the actual manifesto, But the thing that really, I think, more than anything drove him to this is the state of capitalism in America right now. And I'm not saying this as like a rah-rah socialist, communist, whatever. I'm just saying the things that he complains about, the things that he calls out as being oppressive to the average person, as pushing everybody down, as these oligarchs ruling over us. He has a lot of good points. He takes it to abnormal and weird and extreme places that are very wrong, obviously. But he brings up a lot of good points. Azzarello was arrested in St. Augustine 3 times between August 19th and 24th, 2023. I'm sorry, everybody. One of those arrests was for allegedly throwing a glass of wine at the wall where an autograph from Bill Clinton was in the lobby of the Casa Monica Resort and Spa. The hotel established that caused between $400 and $500 worth of damage. His second arrest came at the hotel where Azzarello was cursing loudly and removing his clothes, police alleged. His third arrest was for allegedly defacing, very different signs in St. Augustine, including one for a construction site and a little free library. In a mugshot taken by Florida cops, Azzarello is seen sticking his tongue out and closing his left eye. Records show Azzarello filed a federal lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation last April that included Mark Cuban, Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, Sam Bankman-Fried, and over a dozen others as co-defendants. He alleged they'd each participated and benefited financially from a decades-long fraudulent scheme. The lawsuit fizzled out after Azzarello failed to show cause for why a court should take up the suit, which was officially dismissed in October. His Substack Manifesto frequently mentioned the Clintons and the Clinton Global Initiative, linking them to Jeffrey Epstein and sex trafficking. He also parroted the popular QAnon conspiracy that all politicians on both sides of the aisle work together to maintain a world order that keeps them in power. This is part of what happens when we don't have proper mental health care in the country, when we don't have ease of access for that mental health care. On one hand, and then on the other hand, we have these growing structures of social media that are encompassing our entire lives, which is exactly what people like Elon Musk want to happen. They want these places to be like when Elon Musk talks about X being the everything app, I think he sees it as some kind of like Star Trek-y future, like you can all link and pay and do all these things for one app, because he's naive and stupid. The reality is that it's just making social media more encompassing to our lives. But social media has driven its claws so far into our lives, and that has made political discourse a million times worse, especially when you continue to have conspiracy theories just proliferate unabated on every platform. And it's gotten so much worse with Twitter. The end result, like this is the logical end result of a cultural climate where people's needs, basic needs, are not being addressed. Things like needing more rent, needing lower rent and getting paid more money. Things like mental health care. Things like being afraid for personal safety. Not knowing where your next meal might come from. Meanwhile, we all acknowledge that there is an entirely different class of people in America that are not held to these same standards, that don't have to worry about anything. That at the end of the day, they don't pay the same taxes as everybody else. They don't tangibly live in the same world that we do. And I feel like, unfortunately, this is what happened. This is one eventuality of a mental health care crisis, a living crisis, and a conspiracy crisis, all colliding with each other. So, from the Ponzi papers, I have set myself on fire outside the Trump trial. My name is Max Azzarello, and I am an investigative researcher who has set himself on fire outside the Trump trial in Manhattan. This extreme act of protest is to draw attention to an urgent and important discovery. We are victims of a totalitarian con, and our own government, along with many of their allies, is about to hit us with an apocalyptic fascist world coup. Now, at first, you might be by using fascist, you might be tempted to think, okay, well, he's on the left. He's not, as we'll see. He sees, from his reading, he sees all of politics as a kind of game being played by what Alex Jones would call globalists. These great manipulators and puppeteers behind the scenes. And again, remember when I talked about in conspiracies, so many conspiracies are based on things that you hear about or you think about for a second. You're like, yeah, no, that does make sense. which is the kind of thing that does make sense when you think about the rich people who don't seem to have to pay for crimes like everybody else, who don't seem to have to pay their taxes like everybody else. It makes more sense that there's a global con going, and especially with some of the evidence he lays out, you begin to read it and you're like, yeah, no, like some of this stuff, I'm not going to lie, he's kind of cooking. Like he's kind of cooking a little bit. These claims sound like fantastical conspiracy theory, but they are not. They're proof of conspiracy. And if you investigate this mountain of research, you will prove them too. If you learn a great deal about Ponzi schemes, you will discover that our life is a lie. If you follow this story in the links below, you will discover the rotten truth of post-truth America. You will learn the scariest and stupidest story in world history, and you will realize that we are all in a desperate state of emergency that requires your action. To my friends and family, witnesses, and first responders, I deeply apologize for inflicting this pain upon you, but I assure you it is a drop in the bucket compared to what our government intends to inflict. Because these words are true, this is an act of revolution. Investigating for yourself is a very common thing in modern conspiracy circles. It's where we got things like the Wayfair conspiracy, where people thought that cabinets were being sold with children inside them. As somebody who has done videos and done documentaries and done investigative pieces and put a lot of fucking research into it, somebody who actually took journalism classes, you have to cite your sources, which is something he doesn't really do here. Which leads me to believe that some of the research, I can't tell what research he was doing, and leads me to compare him to the same kind of people who say, oh, do your own research, when they're talking about things like anti-vax conspiracies. Bill Gates wants to put a microchip in you with the COVID vaccine. Crystals are real science. Like, just the innumerable shit that people will say, oh, do your own research. And then the research turns out to be bullshit or stuff that they'll point you towards. This seems to align with that kind of philosophy of research and journalism, which is not really research or journalism. Last March, a billionaire named Peter Thiel started a bank run on Silicon Valley. I knew enough about Thiel that I found this incredibly suspicious. Peter Thiel, legitimate ghoul, just terrible person. My hunch was that it was intentional, though I couldn't fathom why. I began investigating online and quickly found cryptocurrency's fingers all over it. The bank run occurred just 7 days after Silvergate Bank, which catered almost exclusively to crypto companies, collapsed. Meanwhile, several crypto cheerleaders were all over financing media warning of a regional banking crisis, and nobody in media was addressing the clear crypto connections. I dug deep into financials of Thiel's venture capital firm, Founders Fund, and eventually uncovered the following, all proven many times over. Again, I need the actual proof. I need the links. Cryptocurrency is our first planetary multi-trillion-dollar Ponzi scheme. And this is where he's kind of like, again, from somebody on the outside, you hear that. Somebody who's a leftist, I hear that and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I could see that. When the Ponzi scheme goes insolvent, it would take down half the stock market with it. Here's where it gets a little too conspiratorial, because this is the stuff that he apparently alleged in his lawsuit against a lot of these people that he was unable to provide standing for, which means he couldn't actually prove that it was happening. It was too speculative. Stanford's StartX.com investment fund and Jeffrey Epstein's program for evolutionary dynamics he ran at Harvard are both fake science Ponzi factories that these schools have invested billions in. They are filled with fraudulent companies that use smoke and mirrors to promise miraculous new technology, but almost always collapse when the perpetrators only get richer. Something that does actually happen. Something that Peter Thiel in the past has been fucking involved in. Funneling trillions of dollars in stolen cash through the stock market created the largest stock market anomaly in history. The stock chart signature of a Ponzi scheme is a massive increase. This chart shape appeared in all companies listed above. In order to explain the massive anomaly, our criminal government unleashed COVID on the world and told us these were stay-at-home stocks. So already here you can see the split in his ideology. You can see him promoting COVID conspiracy, which is patently something from the right wing, while also talking against big corporations, Peter Thiel, who is a well-known conservative donor, making some people think he might be more of the left wing. So, like, the idea of Trump and Hillary Clinton working together is, well, it's something that could only work in a conspiracy. Like, nobody would subject themselves to the constant calls for death threats, to the just the unmitigated harassment Hillary Clinton has been under nobody would go through all of the legal shit that Trump has been under. All for like it doesn't make sense. They haven't had a friendly rivalry. Like Trump's associates and his followers have called for her death. Like it is not like this does not track. This does not chart. Like the idea of, again, this is conspiracies are a way of making sense of things that don't make sense to us. Right? So if you present the idea that why aren't our politicians doing more to help us? The Democrats I voted for aren't doing anything to help me. Okay, well, the Republicans I voted for aren't doing anything to help me. Then the conspiracy becomes clear that they are working together. Working together for what? Now, in reality, it is probably more likely that they are working together to consolidate interests, or that they don't help the little people as much because when it comes to shit like aid packages and voting, they always have to play ball. They always have to like give concessions on shit, which we hear about all the time coming out of Congress and the Senate. But more conspiracy-minded people, instead of saying, okay, well, they're probably just working in the interest of big money, will say it's a kleptocracy. Which is where we're at right now. And again, one of the key findings of this research, he's saying that he's doing research, he's not showing the actual work, is that Harvard University is one of the largest organized crime fronts in history, which is how they churn out billionaires. It's a major hub of the sprawling criminal network. It can simply be an Ivy League school. That's why they churn out billionaires. Like, because billionaires will go in there. Kids with rich families will go in there. Having an Ivy League background gets you into shit like hedge fund management. That's why. Like, you take a second to unravel these from his conspiracy that he's concocted, and it shows it that it's arguably just as sinister as what he's saying, but much easier to believe. Like, we kind of do have a cabal of people controlling our lives. The rich and powerful are immune from actual prosecution, from tangible consequences of their actions. We know that. Like, we saw it with Jeffrey Epstein. Like, the dude walks on charges of pedophilia. The first time. Alan Dershowitz, friend of Trump, helped him get off. And we know, what was he doing during that time he was supposed to be under house arrest? He was fucking gallivanting on the town and doing all the same shit he was doing before. Like, there is a level of wealth that insulates you from actual consequence. And in my personal opinion, it's a level of wealth that degrades a human's morality. Just because you can. Because you don't see the world like everybody else does. You see yourself as above everybody else. We see that with Elon Musk all the fucking time. When you are so wrapped up in trying to see everything as a puzzle that all fits together, you start seeing everything as pieces. Even when it's just not there. As we will see with his thing on the Simpsons. I want to look up really quick. 762 episodes of The Simpsons. Keep that in mind. As it turns out, dozens of the writers of The Simpsons went to Harvard. So I asked myself the question, if The Simpsons served the interests of organized crime, how would it do so? So now he is making the case based on a few Simpsons episodes that it is part of a massive brainwashing technique. And he'll also list off other stuff that, oh boy. It offers a dysfunctional family suffering from moral decay, a community incapable of solving its problems, a worker drone who slaves away for an evil billionaire, and cathartic laughs for our poor collective circumstances. Conspiracy theorists do this a lot, where they will, and Alex Jones does it all the time, or he used to do it a lot more, where they talked about things like predictive programming, where essentially they will say that, you know, art, film, music, or whatever, it's meant to make you used to something. Like you're going to watch Blade Runner and you're going to get used to the idea of being ruled over by mega corporations. The reality is it's usually backwards from that. It's usually art is a reflection of what artists see in the world, which is why art goes through trends. Like horror is a great actual indicator of it. Because during the Dare Scare, during a rise in evangelical movements through the 1980s and 90s, slasher horror was in. Big old deal slasher horror was. During anxieties about teenagers, drugs, possible violence, slashers like Scream and a whole bunch of knockoffs were in. In the early 2000s, post 9/11, morally gray morality plays in the form of things like Saw, Death Sentence, The Brave One. A lot of stories in the horror space of doing what you need to do to survive no matter how painful in the shadow of 9/11. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. Personally, I find that fascinating. I find it likewise fascinating that right after that, after the housing bubble collapse, there was a massive spate of haunted house horror movies. Paranormal Activity, Insidious, The Conjuring, for years and years. And those finally died out a little bit. I feel like we're kind of in this weird waiting zone right now. But you look at the culture around these different movements, and they do peter out due to just audiences being less interested. But you have to ask yourself, why are the audiences interested at that particular time? Why are those the things that take off? So it's not, when you're talking about things like this, when The Simpsons offers a dysfunctional family suffering from moral decay, a community incapable of solving its problems, a worker drone who slaves away for an evil billionaire, and cathartic laughs for our poor collective circumstances, what is more likely? That even though people were at Harvard, that they are basing it on things that they knew were popular, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, where you had a ton of family sitcoms. Married with Children, Home Improvement, Sanford and Sons. Like, the dysfunctional family dynamic appealed so much. It still does. They still make sitcoms just like that. Because everybody can relate to having family members that you can barely stand them sometimes, or something funny happens. Like, what is more likely, that it is predictive programming or it is based on these universally accepted and recognized traits that we see around us all the time? Because of the way capitalism is formed around us. We see things like worker drones who slave away for an evil billionaire. Like, that is not a new or interesting observation. It's just something that a lot of people accept as their daily life. Like, how old is the idea, boss makes $1, I make a dime? And he goes into some specifics, which I don't really want to go over. I think this is like taking literally 2 episodes out of a show with more than 700 that were written by tons of different writers across several decades is... I'm going to say this speaks, I think, to the quality of his research. It is about your average conspiracy theorist research, where they will say, look at all this stuff I've looked at, and then look at this undeniable proof, and the proof is just things that have a tangential similarity to reality. We realize the criminal truth of The Simpsons. Our elites are telling us that our eroding collective circumstances are our own fault and we can't do anything about it, while they steal the American dream from us. It is, for lack of a more elegant word, brainwashing. Lastly, we string these major discoveries together. Again, he has not made any actual discoveries. This is your brain on conspiracy posting. This is your brain on do your own research when you don't actually have anything tangible to temper yourself with. When you think everything is a development. When you think watching YouTube videos is doing research. When you aren't looking into the sources behind things. This is why I go through so much effort to exhaustively cite almost every source I use. But here's where he gets into some stuff that is actually like, you begin to see his point. Social media, owned by crypto criminals like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, is flooded with nonsense conspiracy theories and memes reminding us that we are hopeless, helpless, anxious, depressed, ironic, scared, apathetic, escapist, lonely, misguided, and jaded, telling us we can't do anything but have a laugh at our circumstances. And it's here where he's kind of cooking. Like, he's like, yeah, I mentioned all that shit at the beginning. Like, yeah, all of that is true. No fucking notes, dude. Liberals mock the hypocrisy of conservatives. Conservatives mock the hypocrisy of liberals, and our collective circumstances erode. The left shouts all cops are bastards, which ensures they'll be hated by the police and the public, and flies in the face of leftist theory. I don't really agree with that. The public's distrust of the government is at an all-time high, but so is the belief that we are helpless to do anything about it. So here we see, again, he is not really picking any political side. At the beginning, he talked about this kleptocracy, and it seems that anybody who ascribes to a political ideology, to him, is the bad guy. Or they might as well be all on the same side. And with this, a sharp rise in apocalyptic messaging. Climate change will kill us all. COVID will kill us all. Vaccines will kill us all. AI will kill us all. No matter the bubbles we ascribe to, we're bombarded with existential crises. We're bombarded with existential crises with no solutions. We've seen a surge in apocalyptic film, literature, and video games that tells us there's no way out of our poor circumstances but societal breakdown. That is, again, not necessarily true. That is not often the message of post-apocalyptic films, and people have been making films about the apocalypse since the 50s. Like, and arguably, again, you can affix what I was saying earlier about different trends in film being based on societal movements, like the 50s being the atomic age, obviously, in the shadow of the Cold War. The ideas about living in a radiated wasteland, pretty scary. You see, carry that on through 60s, 70s, all the way to things like Mad Max. You understand why they happened when they did, why the movies came out when they did. And yeah, we still carry those anxieties with us today, and they still come through in a lot of that media. But sometimes that's just genre convention. Sometimes that's just a franchise, you know? And here's where he really gets in, like, this is where he starts actually kind of breaking down. Zombies tell us that the public is our enemy. If you go to your nearest convenience store, you can buy a can of water called liquid death. This is a rotten farce. For our entire lives, we've been flooded with media designed to slowly steer us into a world where the American dream was dead, where the public was rightfully divided against itself, and everybody believed we were powerless to do anything about our worsening circumstances. It is also they can organize an unprecedented apocalyptic rug pull on the entire populace as they pivot to fascism, which is perhaps best understood as kleptocracy at the barrel of a gun. He doesn't specify, outside of the people he talked about at the beginning, he doesn't actually specify how this would happen. Who is actually behind it? We are in a totalitarian doomsday cult. Why on earth would our elites do this? There are many reasons, but the simplest is because capitalism is unsustainable, true, and they knew it. Climate change and resource extraction would catch up eventually, true. So they never intended to sustain it. Again, this is where this is just good points. They knew all along they would gobble up all the wealth they could and then yank the rug out from under us so they could pivot to a hellish fascist dystopia. No connective tissue there. Like, there's just not a lot. Exactly. Kiwi TP and Twitch, it's like 50% true and 50% what the fuck. And that is exactly what I'm saying. This is what happens when somebody can recognize things that are wrong, these imbalances, the injustices in society. Yet, you don't know what to do about it, but to continue just finding more and more ways to make everything you see into puzzle pieces to fit into this conspiracy puzzle. Here is where, like, this is just, he does not understand the media he's consuming, and he's trying to portray it as predictive programming. So yeah, here's where it goes back into just a worrying lack of media literacy, like just literally not understanding the themes of things and imprinting his own meaning. In the most conspiratorial way. Why is Stanley Kubrick's comedy about a mutually assured destruction called Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb? Because he was a cocky secret fascist who was getting us to stop worrying and love the bomb. I don't think he watched that movie. I'm going to be real. I don't think you watched that movie because it's pretty clearly a black comedy that was satire. Pretty famously and clearly. It is not about how cool nuclear war is. Why did he make A Clockwork Orange? So we rejoice at ultraviolence designed to desensitize us to the horrors of the world. Again, very clearly not the point of that movie. Like, there's a whole reprogramming sequence. The Droogs, they're called the Droogs, right? Are meant to represent wayward, misguided, violent youth. They're not the heroes of the story. Why were the Manson murders crawling with cover-ups and intelligence agents? Because our government wanted to make us fear for our lives and believe that hippies are deranged psychopaths. I actually want to see what he did here. Largely criticizing O'Neill for exploring too many theories. Early chapters of the book do a convincing job picking out the flaws in Bugliosi's case, but the wheels start to come off when O'Neill begins searching for alternative explanations. So it's... Okay. So it does not conclusively prove anything. It is just speculative, investigative work. Which is that's interesting as not conclusive proof. And here's where I don't really understand what he's trying to get at. Why did the Beatles tell us to fear the taxman, to scoff at revolution, chase nonsense conspiracy theories, and tell us that happiness is a worm gun so we would believe it? Why did Wall Street tell us greed is good so we would believe it? Wall Street, another movie, famously not actually about how greed is a good thing. That is the point of that movie. Why did Do the Right Thing tell us we're all racially tribalized so we would believe it? Yeah. And on and on and on. When it comes to any popular media, if you ask yourself the question, why would secret doomsday cult kleptocrats want the public to consume this, you'll find your answers. This assumes that, first off, Do the Right Thing was an independent film, I believe. Yeah, here's where it came from. This incident involved an attack on African-American men in a predominantly Italian-American neighborhood, resulting in one victim being struck by a car and killed. Lee was also influenced by the Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode Shopping for Death, in which the main characters discuss their theory that hot weather increases violent tendencies. Art is inspired by the world around us. And that is why, like I was talking about earlier, there are trends in art that you can see and pick out across certain movements that will ebb and flow. They'll change, and people will gain and lose interest with them depending on the culture they're in. There are times where movies or books aren't even relevant until years later. Like this happened with the 60s when a ton of books from the 30s and 40s were revitalized by professors and English teachers and all that kind of shit. It's not because elites make everything. And especially I feel like that is proven by how he just does not understand the very intentional points of the art being made here. This is obviously very bad. This is the last of his thing. This is obviously very bad news, but the biggest lie we've been told is that we're powerless. We've got one way out of hell world, and that's for the public to realize we've been conned completely so we can build a united movement that shatters every lie they've told us, mocks this rotten farce as loudly as it deserves, and aims at nothing short of abolishing our criminal government so we can build one that serves the public. An admirable goal. For a true history of America since the end of World War II, click here. Oh boy. Here's a federal lawsuit I filed against dozens of perpetrators of the current cryptocurrency Ponzi, not for litigation, just to preserve the information and attach my name to it. I was terrified and hadn't slept in days, and it shows, but it served its purpose of keeping myself alive long enough to keep learning and telling the story. I no longer have my original research files from my crypto rabbit hole. If you want to see them, you'll have to get my laptop back from the government. Ask them how they got it. It's a very fun story. I know you know how powerful you are. I wish you a hell of a lot more than luck. So it's not clear what his intention was here. All right, let's look at the true history of World War II. Haunted Carnival Edition. Why? The story was essentially proven. All right, let me. Oh boy. Don't take my word for it. Here are Hitler's own words. The size of a lie is a definite factor in causing it to believe, because the vast masses of a nation never credit others with the possibility of such great impudence as a complete reversal of facts. Using Hitler's words about a conspiracy against Jews to prove your conspiracy is like, dude, like that's big brain shit, but that is not the move. This is our Great Reset, our New World Order. Great Reset, another thing that is very right-wing, very QAnon adjacent. Right. We got to talk about the liquid death thing. Again, humanity has had a fixation with death in iconography, in fiction, since the beginning of time. Like how much medieval art is focused on death or demons or gargoyles or like curses or any of that shit. So much. It has been a main staple of our artistic exploration as a species, like since we first learned what it was. Like the great darkness waiting for all of us at one point or another. Pretty artistically powerful shit. It is not indicative of a death cult because you have a skull on a drink of water, flavored water. Want to stare the doomsday cult in the face? Just head down to your local convenience store and check out the water selection. There you'll likely see these cans. This is water. Water is life. The fact that water is something we all need to survive has been bottled up and sold to us at unbelievable markups is evidence of kleptocracy. It's just evidence of capitalism. Like it's just evidence of trying to sell things at a higher premium because of brand recognition. Like that's capitalism. That's advertising. That's seeing celebrities with something and going, ooh, I want that too, because they have it. The fact we now have a water called Liquid Death shows just how far this criminal disinformation campaign has come, as they've convinced the public to pay money for water that evokes hopelessness and death. It's just meant to look cool. It's just meant to be like water, but cooler. You're in hell, says Palm Wonderful. That they didn't say you're in hell. It says real life is scary. Protect yourself from free radicals with Palm Wonderful. Is that, I'm sure that was like a haunted, flashing blacklight imagery, like a real jump scare in a horror movie. I'm sure it does not say you're only safe in Hellworld if you buy this juice. There's only so much we can do to keep this from continuing to happen. And I think as this election especially heats up, and as we see more heated inflammatory rhetoric coming across, I can only think that we're probably going to keep seeing stuff like this happening, unfortunately.